Welcome to the Ryan Frank Podcast. Ryan is a family man, first and foremost, but he's also a pastor, publisher, and serial entrepreneur. This podcast will help you think, work, and create like never before.
Welcome to the Ryan Frank Podcast. It is Ryan Frank, and I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. I want to remind you that if you are listening to the podcast, that there's also a YouTube version of the podcast as well. You can find all of the links at ryanfrank.com. Super excited to have Josh Denhart with me on the podcast this week. Josh Denhart is the creator of Lead Ministry, Lead Volunteers. He's also the creator of KidMin Science. If you've been to our conference, the Kids Matter Conference, you surely have met Josh Denhart. He is a creative ministry leader that is passionate about helping leaders like yourself in their ministry. Now, if you're a marketplace leader, I don't want you to tune out. Our focus today is going to be on volunteers, but I promise you, even if you don't have any volunteers, you're going to find some value in today's podcast. Because here's the thing, you can't do life alone. You can't lead alone. You have to have other people with you. And in today's podcast, we're going to drill deep into recruiting and caring for volunteers. What does that look like? How do you recruit people when they are so busy doing a million other things? How do you care for volunteers, especially if you have a lot of them? You're one person and you've got all of these volunteers. What does it look like to train volunteers? You know, it's one thing to recruit them and to try to care for them, but then how do you train them up? We're going to get super into the minutia of what it really looks like to care for volunteers in this week's podcast. So thanks again for tuning in. I think you're going to find a lot of value. By the way, it's going to get really, really good it's all good, but for me, really hit close to home when Josh and I dove into the topic of church or work-family balance and how do you prioritize your family. This is something that we all struggle with as leaders and we have to wrestle through, and that is, how do I make sure that I am doing my family right and I am not spending too much time at work, too much time doing good things that I forget about the most important things, which are the people closest to you. So with all that being said, here is my interview with Josh Denhart. Hey, Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much, Ryan. I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah. Well, wonderful to talk. Josh, you know, there are so many things we could talk about, but one thing I want to hone in on today is something that I know you are very, very passionate about these days, and that is this topic of volunteers. Yeah. Not just recruiting volunteers, but caring for those volunteers and retaining those volunteers. I have said for a long time, and it's not an original quote of mine, but that volunteers are the lifeblood of a ministry. And
that's the truth.
You agree with that, don't you?
I sure do. And I would say that leading volunteers, recruiting, training, retaining volunteers, in my opinion, is the single biggest pain point for any person who's in a ministry context, and how much more so for those who are in a children's ministry context.
Well, that's it. Yeah, because I mean, these kids ministry leaders, with many of you that are watching or listening, you're a kids ministry leader and you have to recruit more volunteers than anybody else in the church. And it's difficult, isn't it?
It is.
And
it is.
But it's not impossible. You just have to have a plan and be intentional. And I know this is something that you are teaching all of the time, Josh, on your podcast, and as you go around and you're training leaders and you're speaking. So let's rewind just a little bit. In the intro, I kind of gave everybody a few quick snapshots of who Josh Denhart is. I know a lot of you that you come to the Kids Matter Conference, or you know, you're in the children's ministry circle. You know Josh and Sarah and their ministry, but we take just a minute and Josh, tell everybody your ministry story. So I know you've spent a lot of years working at church, and in this season, God has shifted that. Will you take 2 minutes and tell us your story?
Yeah, so I was a former high school chemistry teacher who
Okay.
turned children's pastor.
Yeah.
And during my high school chemistry years, I kind of created a traveling science show called The Amazing Chemistry Show. And so it was fire, explosions, foam, liquid nitrogen, all set to music. And I began to incorporate illustrations for the gospel around this.
Yeah.
Super fun, super exciting. And so then before too long, Ryan, it just the Amazing Chemistry Show absolutely took off. I ended up creating 3 different science vacation Bible schools. This was, of course, all while I was a children's pastor.
Yes. Yes.
Super fun. So that was kind of the chemistry into ministry years. But boy, when I was a children's pastor, hard stuff, man. I inherited or took over for a very kind of beat up, hard ministry, and so I had a lot of work to do, which we'll get into today on our call
Yeah.
on the podcast. And then, through some of those hardships of righting the ship, so to speak, at the church that I was serving at, that's where I kind of created and compiled all of the content for leadministry.com, which
You're
is
amazing. I got to interrupt real quick. How are you
okay.
making this pop up on the screen live real time?
Wow.
I'm trying to hold a straight face and I'm like, this is impressive.
Well, I
You are,
appreciate that.
yeah. One thing about Josh does I cut you off mid story and I'm sorry. We're
You're
not
okay.
going to remember where you were. Josh does everything with excellence and he's a techie guy and he's always impressing me. And you're impressing me again by putting your logos up right by your face as we're talking. Way to go. I love it.
Well,
Yeah.
you bet, man. It as they say, it's all magic until you know how it works. Am I
That's
right?
exactly right. Yeah. Okay.
So
So before
ultimately
I so rudely interrupted. Yes.
No, that's good. So ultimately, leadministry.com, in our kind of flagship course, Lead Volunteers, all of that was kind of built right out of the idea of all of the systems and all of the trajectory that I had to find myself on in order to survive in a ministry context. And so, in a sense, through my survival and then into actually thriving, I just kind of codified all that stuff
Mhm.
and thought, I think other people could greatly benefit from this. And so now it grew, Ryan, to such a level that it kind of demanded my full vocational attention.
Yeah.
And so I transitioned out of a full-time vocational role as a pastor for about a decade, a little over a decade. And now I do this kind of full-time. And so I travel around, speak and teach and communicate, and people
Yeah.
join the membership. I do one-on-one coaching with people. So there you go.
I love it. You're now pastoring pastors, which is really cool and
Yep.
quite an honor, a blessing. So Josh, we're going to talk today about recruiting and caring for volunteers. I'd love also if we have a little time to also talk about training volunteers, because I know that's a challenge, but let's start with recruiting. You probably get this question all the time, as do I. And that is there a secret to recruiting volunteers? Everybody needs volunteers. Is there some secret that can be found, or if somebody asked you that question, how would you answer it? What's the secret to recruiting volunteers?
Yeah, I would say it's a yes and a no. There is a
Okay.
secret, and it's not really a secret. So,
Okay.
what I want to share is, our topic today is the secrets to recruitment and retention, and
Mhm.
those are 2 big things. I would say the
Mhm.
first thing, what I'm getting ready to share today is how you gain them, is how you will retain them.
Mhm.
How you gain them, how you recruit them is going to be how you
Yep.
retain or keep them. Now,
Yep.
listen carefully. This is straight out of scripture. It's the law of the harvest. Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, therefore shall he also reap.
Mhm.
So, the way that you go into bringing somebody on your team is going to be in keeping with how you keep them on your team. So, let's go first with instead of the secret, let's go with the anti-secret. These are
Okay.
a list of things that you should not do.
So this
And
is
so,
stuff that you've seen that leaders
oh,
do wrong when it comes to
yeah.
recruiting volunteers.
Yeah, but let's get really
Yeah.
personal. These are
Okay.
things that I myself did that were an
Yes.
epic fail,
Yep.
right? But I've also seen a lot of leaders through
Yep.
coaching and things. Okay.
Yep.
So I remember one time, Ryan, I asked our senior pastor, oh boy, we were up against the wall. And I asked the senior pastor to make this really big plea, right? I said, hey, I need you really bad to do this thing for me. And so he reluctantly made this a whole entire sermon series, or sermon one day, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And did this. And interestingly enough, he got up, preached this message, and the call to action was, you need to serve in the nursery. Now, I got to be honest with you. He had this little message, and it turned out to be 91 people checked a box on this little community card. 91 people.
So that would appear to, I mean, that's a massive success. It would appear that way, right?
That's right.
Yes.
And so, but now keep in mind, how we got them is going to be in keeping with how we keep them. And so, lo and behold, by the way, Ryan, we had cleared the decks. And we had no other work to do but follow up on anybody who might come in. So our Monday through Friday was dedicated to following up on these new people. So 91 people come in. He, of course, has this badge of honor that he won for us big.
Mm-hmm.
We spent the next 5 days. We had emails pre-written.
Mm-hmm.
We were ready. And I'm going to narrow the story down to say, of all of those 91 people, two people translated onto our team. And in 6 months, no one was on our team. Mm-hmm. So hear me out real quick. That was a quick fix. It was an emotional charge that the senior pastor gave, and people, what kind of commitment does it take to check a box? Not very much. So we spent all kinds of time calling, emailing, following up, and every one of those were dead ends. Now, if somebody were thinking of this in a business context, they would say there are hot leads and there are cold leads. A lead is somebody that you're seeking to see if you could maybe get them to join your team, right? And so with this recruiting thing, those were absolutely cold leads. And guess what, Ryan? They did not translate to anything. And so senior pastor pleading, not a win. Next one, cute videos. Come on. So all of a sudden, the senior pastor's like, okay, I'm going to throw you a bone, bud. You can have a 60-second little commercial. And so you go out and you find that you pay, $7.95 for this real, you and all your staff are patting your eyes because it was so emotional. Well, the reason that it's emotional is because you're in children's ministry, people.
That's true.
The people in the crowd,
and you need help, right?
And nobody else. It's an emotional video that tugs at your heartstrings because your heartstrings are already in line with children's ministry. Your average person, this is a complete flop. And so I have watched leaders. I was on a coaching call and they said, "Okay, we are pumped. We got a 60-second commercial and we've got our display table and we're all out there with our pads of paper ready to sign people up." And then I talked to him again. I said, and I knew it was going to happen. And I said, "How'd that go for you?" They said, "Well, not a single person came to our table." Well, there you go, because that was not an effective strategy. And of course, I've done these things, and so I'm just as guilty as the next one. Accosting people in the hall. This is an anti-recruitment strategy, and you might be like, "Wow, Josh, you weren't that guy, were you?" Why, yes, I was. And that I call this drive-by recruiting, Ryan. Drive-by recruiting. And so all of a sudden, people who I see in the hall, and now I'm beelining toward them. And listen, if somebody is actually darting down a hall away from you, that is an ineffective recruiting strategy.
That's not a good sign. Exactly.
Right. And so, listen, the last thing you want is for people to run away with you. And I'm just going to do a couple quick more that are the bad ones. Sending a bulk email. Now, hear me out. For extra cringe worthiness, make sure you put everybody's name in the CC, not the BCC. Am I right?
Yep. That now create some cringes. Yep.
Okay, that's right. Now, I got to tell you, I have a story here about this bulk email thing. And I want to lead with, this was completely my fault.
Okay.
But it starts with one of my associates. His name was Carter. And he was new on the team. And I work from the 12, the 3, and the 1. And so my insider 3 people, Amy, Andy, and Beth, we were all hanging out together. And we were going to throw good old Carter a bone, right? So we all looked through our lists of all of the people that we were going to recruit that year, the really good ones. We're like, okay, I know for a fact this person is going to say yes. They have a kid in my room, whatever. So what do? We were so self-sacrificial, and we said, let's pull some of these names and gift them to Carter. So we brought Carter and we said, bro, this is your first year. You don't know very many people here. This is low-hanging fruit. These are the best of the best. So he left. Before lunch, he put all of their names in an email, sent a singular bulk email, all of them in the CC, not the BCC.
Okay.
And we all went to lunch. And when he came back, we came back from lunch, he had a no from every single person.
Wow.
That's super easy to say no to an email. Am I right?
Well, you know what? That's true, isn't it? That's a good point.
And so that, now somebody might go, wow, Josh just drove the bus over this fella Carter. I said at the onset of this little story, that was my fault. I didn't teach nor train him how to effectively recruit in that situation. I made a lot of assumptions, and that was a colossal fail for him. Okay, another one.
Josh, let's hit pause real quick.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in what you said real quick a minute ago, and that is 12-3-1. Will you take a minute and unpack that? Just literally
Absolutely.
1 or 2 minutes, because that is so important for everybody to get if you don't get this.
Yeah, so this is inside of the lead volunteers kind of framework. This would be, it's recruit, it's train, and it's retain. And so this is the framework for the train. And so if you're watching this on a video, you can see on the screen, I had this kind of inverted triangle, and Jesus spent a lot of time with the masses. Well, really not that much time, right? We'll say John 5, 6, 7, he spoke to the masses. And then in John 8 and 9, he spoke to the core, this group of people that were traveling around. However, he went to a mountain. We know the verse well. It said, hey, harvest is plentiful, workers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest. Jesus went to the mountain, prayed all night long, and God provided 12 people. Those are the 12 disciples. But inside of the 12, he actually had Peter, James, and John.
Kind of his inner circle.
His inner circle. But he also had John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, who happened to be faster than Peter, if you know the story, right? Beat him to the tomb, right? But at the end of the day, I have sought to, in my leadership in the church and beyond, is I am looking for 12 people. It doesn't have to be, it's not magical. It could be 10, but I'm looking for a set of people, faithful in little, they'll be faithful in much. And then within those, I look for 3, and I literally call them out as an individual. And I say, I call it the I see in you, the letters I, and then C, and then in, and then you. I see in you something special. And I'm calling, I want you to join me on this deeper journey. And then, of course, I have that person that I'm literally dedicating the vast majority of my life to. They're my one. So I think that every leader out there, you should have an ever increasing, ever decreasing circle of closeness to you, right? And I would say, you know, one of the fails with training is people think, wow, man, I got to train everybody. No, you don't. You absolutely don't have to train everybody. You follow Jesus's model. He spent very little time with the masses. If you actually look at the scriptures, Sermon on the Mount, feeding of the 5,000, feeding of the 4,000, when he pulled back on a boat, when he taught in the temple a couple times a year, but by and large, the majority of his ministry was just with the 12 and the 3 and the 1, right?
Yeah. So you think it's okay, Josh, to spend more time with, or to spend a lot of time with the 1, maybe not quite as much time, but a good amount of time with the 3. It's okay to spend more time with some than others, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Somebody said to me one time, whoa, are you saying that Jesus had favorites? And I said, I'm absolutely saying that, and so should you. Now, it's not favoritism. It's kind of a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing. But at the end of the day, what I do believe is that Jesus clearly spent a significant more and invested more into a few than he did into the rest. Interestingly enough, Thaddeus or Bartholomew, we hear their names 2 times in the Bible, when they were first picked and when they were repicked as apostles in the book of Acts. They were certainly significant, but he didn't bring them into a healing, into an inner circle. He didn't take them to the Mount of Transfiguration. He actually did extra and special things with others. And so I am always seeking to bring people with me on this ride, on this hard conversation. I want you to sit in on this. I'm going to give you a little bit of a deeper look into the totality of what it means to be a pastor.
Yeah. Boy, that's good. That was a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I think that is so important to understand.
And ultimately that guy Carter, he was one of my 12 and he became one of my 3. But, you know, I just dropped the ball with him and I did not do a good job of instructing him. So we all make mistakes, right?
And I think one of the great jobs that we have as leaders, in addition to identifying that 1, the 3, the 12, if you even want to go a little bit bigger with the 70 or the crowd or whatever, is looking at everybody and who can I bring up to the 12?
Yes.
And out of that 12, you're always wanting to bring people up, right? Is there a shining star of that 12 that can become one of my 3? And
absolutely,
always trying to move people up.
Very, very true. And I want to stick on this rabbit trail for just a second, because there were people who I cycled in and out of those different places and spaces. Yes. In other words, it wasn't, now my 1 stayed true to be my 1 for a really long time, but there were people that I moved in and out of that 3. And I spent it, and I had to be careful too, because I was dedicating a significant portion of my life and my energies toward that 1 person. And I got to tell you, if I can only spend a certain amount of time with individuals, I'm going to be extremely discerning and cutthroat about who I'm going to invest in, because this is my one and only life and I want it to count as much as possible. So I'm not looking for a flake who won't show up. I'm not looking for a flake who isn't going to, push themselves. I'm looking for somebody who's been faithful in little. They're going to be, as scripture says, faithful in much.
Yeah. And maybe you're listening to the podcast or watching today and you're thinking, well, I wish I had, an inner circle. Maybe you've got a bunch of volunteers. Maybe you have leaders. Well, you need an inner circle. Every leader, Josh, I believe, needs a few people that you can think with and dream with and be vulnerable with. And I think it's one of the many secrets that we could share on, sustainable leadership. You got to have that inner circle of people.
You do.
Jesus
and I had
did,
somebody,
and you need to.
For sure. I had somebody say to me, but Josh, I don't have any real superstars. And I said, well, can I tell you something? You go to war with the army that you got, not the one that you wished you had.
Boy, that's good. Yeah.
And, David, look at David.
Yeah.
He was sent out and he was running from Saul and he ended up at a mount in a cave, and all of the disheveled, the debtors, the disenfranchised, they all followed him. He didn't start with the mighty men, Ryan. He developed the mighty men. And so that's our call.
Good point. All right, let's go back to your list of some of the mistakes we make, unless you were done with that part.
Oh, no. This is one of the most painful. Because here's the deal. If you gain people by begging, then you're not going to retain them because they have no vision. All they're doing is they're saying yes to your almost pathetic need.
Yeah.
It's that they're okay. Begging is a low calling. And you're not. So here's the deal.
Yeah.
I don't want to, I want to low light the pain points. I want to highlight the vision and the value and how this is going to make a difference and how this is going to bless their life. Now, I don't hide the idea. This is going to cost them something. Every commitment costs. But what I don't want to do is ever be that guy who's literally backed up against a wall, begging and looking like I'm groveling. That is not a happy invitation at all. People are like, dang. So it's like a sink. So you want me to join a sinking ship?
That's it. Yeah, you're right. Well, what's that communicate? If you're begging, it appears to me as though it really communicates. Nobody wants to work back here. Please, somebody. We'll take anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But we're so guilty of it. Yeah.
We are. And by the way, it's not about pretending either. Right. I'm not all of a sudden, if things are really hard, I'm going to be an authentic and honest leader. I'm not going to go, oh no, here, put on these rosy glasses. It's fine, everyone. No, I'm going to be honest about the needs that we have. But what I'm not going to do is I got to be a positive person. I mean, there's so much to be said about being a positive, forward-thinking person.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
And begging is not going to be your answer on that one. One more I would say is to transition away from this how you gain them the wrong way. I want to now turn the corner on how you gain them in the right way. Okay. So this is the beginnings of our pivot here about how you're going to retain them.
Okay.
This was a game changer for me. It says this in the book of 1 Thessalonians, but we proved to be gentle among you as a nursing mother cares tenderly for her own children, having a so fond an affection for you. We were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our very own lives, because you had become very dear to us. So for me, what I would tell people is, if you agree to do this, I lay out a vision and I lay out what their job is going to be and all of those tactical things that I need to cover. But I make sure I let people know, even though it's not a good trade, you're going to get me. You're going to get me in your corner. You're going to get a relationship with me. I'm going to be like, you get to be a part of our little family, and we care for our own. And so it's a heart posture. I would say, Ryan, to sum it all up, if you said the secret, if somebody ever asked me the secret, I would say this series of words right here on the screen: relationship, 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 and relationship. Beginning to end. Watch this. Going back to our list of don't do's, senior pastor pleading, that is devoid of relationship. Cute video, devoid of relationship. Accosting people, that is not devoid, that's anti-relationship. Begging, no. But it comes down to pouring into and getting to know an individual, what their unique gifts are, looking up where they've been before. I mean, be a shepherd, not a slot filler, right? One of my most important things when it comes to recruiting is to not open with your canned pitch. Stop. Open with, what is God doing in your life? And listen. Ryan, I got to tell you, a long time ago, again, a lot of these things that I teach and communicate and build structure around are my own mistakes. And so there was a time where this was a high-powered person, and there was a high-powered role that I needed. And so I took him out to lunch, and man, I knew I had about a half an hour, and I was just doing my A game of communicating vision and sharing value and how they're good and how this would benefit their life and all, and how the kingdom's going to grow. And they were on the edge of their seat. Their eyes were, I was like, man, this is going great. And I said, so, what do you think about this? And then his composure changed, and he said, well, my wife just, like, the cancer's back. In addition, my mother-in-law is going to be moving in with us for a short season, and I'm still at the same job, but my job internally changed. So he said, this is a really crazy time. So I don't know if I should and all this. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my word. Why did you not lead with, what is God doing in your life? Because I walked in with the recruiter hat, not the pastor hat or the shepherd hat. And so I want to do that. So that, again, it comes down to relationship. How can I communicate a value just by being a human to a human? What's your thoughts about that?
I 100% agree. I think Jesus modeled this for us. When he recruited his 12, I mean, you talked about the Sermon on the Mount earlier. He didn't preach a Sermon on the Mount and then point to a clipboard over on a table. He went around and made a personal connection with these men, some kind of an impact.
That's right.
And it is so much in life, even beyond, we're talking today about recruiting volunteers, but so much of success in your life and in your ministry is going to hinge upon this very thing right here: relationships.
Yeah.
A lot of people fail in ministry because they fail at relationships. Marriages 100%. Fail because they fail at relationships, and it's all about relationship. John Maxwell has said where there's no connection, there can be no contribution. You've got to connect with people. You've got to connect with people. So Josh, what does that look like if let's say I'm a new kids pastor at a church, or all of a sudden my pastor's announced that we're going to start a second service.
Oh, mercy.
And now all of a sudden I need 8 volunteers. I need 10 volunteers. What does that look like?
For me, I learned this next lesson, Ryan. I'm going to answer your question, but it comes with a little short story. So here I was, a newer children's pastor. I was at this huge national conference that no longer exists.
Yep.
And it was a huge church, right? And I was sitting in the third deck, right? The third tier. That's how big of a church it was, right? And the senior pastor of this church got up and he was addressing the crowd. And I literally thought in my mind these words: wow, it must be easy to find volunteers at a church this size. And I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
It was less than 60 seconds later that he said from the stage, he said, now I imagine that there's somebody out here who's thinking in their minds, wow, it must be easy to find volunteers at a church this size. And I was like,
yep. Put that hand up in the air. Yep.
I literally just thought that.
Yep.
And he went on to share that it is nothing short of a tap on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Nothing replaces a tap on the shoulder. And so this is the other secret, is it's a relationship, but it's individually seeing somebody who has gifts, abilities, some level of faithfulness, and inviting that one person. So you said when it comes to somebody who's starting a brand new job, right? And they're new in this, I would say carve out, hopefully you have some type of like a line item that you can take people out for coffee or lunch. I mean, you don't have to take them to a high class steak dinner. I mean, for real, but you have to, spend some of your budget to get with people. You have to front load on relationship. And another thing for a new person, I would tap into others who have current relationships with people. And I would say, hey, tell me who's who. Tell me the backstory. This is not gossip. This is leadership.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you're a shepherd. Tell me about those 10 sheep. What's the story there? Why does that one walk with a limp? What's going on? So I'm going to tap into other pastors who are going to help me like shorten the gap between my not knowing them and my knowing them as a shepherd.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Got to get to know people.
Yeah, good stuff. We're talking about now retaining volunteers. I think a lot of kids pastors out there think that they have a recruiting problem. We've got all these spots that are emptied, when really, if you step back and look, it may be that they have a retention problem. Do you agree with that? In other words,
1,000%.
yeah, 1,000%. In other words, it may be, maybe you wouldn't have to recruit as much if you were holding on to and really caring for the ones that you already had, so they weren't leaving you with spots to fill. Thoughts?
100%. I can't agree more. This is the pinnacle of what I'm like. If you talk about a life calling, this is what I do in ministry, is educate people how to stop the revolving door of volunteers.
Yes.
And it comes down, ultimately, I'll never forget, somebody said, a friend of mine, he became a member of Lead Volunteers when it first came out. And he said, Josh, you shouldn't have bought Lead Volunteers. You could have just bought beabetterpastor.com. He said, that's what you're communicating, is how to be a better pastor, which is going to keep people with you. Now, I'm going to share something, Ryan, that's it's actually really important. So this has come straight out of the Lead Volunteers kind of ecosystem. And so this right here, this thing that we're looking at is like we had that triangle before, that's the train framework. This is the retain framework. Now, I think of every volunteer has a volunteer health score.
Okay.
And that health score is the aggregate of 10 things. Now, watch here. If we do an exceptional job of every one of these 10 areas, the best score that we could have is a 90, because we don't pay volunteers. That first indicator there is compensation, and then sense of purpose and relationships. So the list goes on. Well, Ryan, we've both been in a math class, and you get that 10-point quiz. And no matter how hard you squeeze that number 2 pencil, that first question, for a fact, you don't know the answer. So you automatically start at a 90.
Yeah.
You have to do a great job on every other one of these things or your grade's going to drop. And so we as pastors, what I'm trying to educate people in, there are these 10 buckets and one of them starts at a 0. We have to do an exceptional job pastorally of all of these other areas, or people are going to fall below this kind of threshold of 70. And if they do, retention is not going to happen. Ryan, watch this. I would say, I wished I could give people a floating graph over the head of their volunteers and say, hey, listen, just look for the floating graph. And they're like, oh my word, Bill, he's low. And then you would know what to pour into. But I can't give you a floating graph. But what I can give you is a strategy, to help fill those things and be a good kids pastor, right?
Love it. Josh, do you want to share any more thoughts on retention, retaining, caring for volunteers?
Yeah, I do.
Again, this is something you're very passionate about. I think it's something that, I don't know, we talk enough about it in kids ministry. It seems like we talk a lot. Everybody wants to know the secrets to recruit, but I don't know if we spend enough time talking about retaining, caring, pastoring, shepherding. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are some things we can be doing. And then I'd also love to hear your thoughts at some point in the next few minutes around what does that look like to care for volunteers if I have 40 of them, or I have 60 volunteers or more?
When I had 450 on a month in, month out basis.
Yeah, that's nuts. Or a bivocational leader that, Ryan, I've got a job Monday through Friday, and then I lead the kids ministry on Sunday. Where am I going to find the time between work and running my kids here and there to care for volunteers? So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on just some practical things we can do. And what's that look like if you've got a bunch of volunteers and maybe you're bivocational, and how do I ever make it happen?
And retain your sanity, right?
Yes, in the process.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I want to do right now is I want to ask you, Ryan, because there's 2 questions that I'm going to answer. One is, how do you retain? And I'm going to answer that. And then the second is, we have a limited amount of time. We have a limited amount of opportunity. What do I actually do? And how can I do that if I have a volume of people? So I'm going to answer the volume of people second, and I'm going to answer the how to retain first. But I want to ask you a question, Ryan. There's 10 of these, and I'm going to ask you to ask me which one of these 10 you want to talk about first. So the first one is compensation. This is a factor or a variable. Yes, I can actually pay a volunteer a stipend. Okay. Another factor that's going to keep them in is sense of purpose.
Okay.
Another one is relationships at work. Do they have friendships with one another as volunteers? Another one, appreciation. By the way, everybody thinks, they're like, why did this volunteer leave? I told them thank you 1,000 times. That's 1/10 of what you need to be doing. Okay.
Good point.
Next one is metric for success, which would be, do they know what they're supposed to do and can they measure that for themselves? Another one, workload. By the way, it cuts both ways. People think that workload is, don't burn them out. Well, boredom is just as dangerous as burnout.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, next one, ownership and influence. Those who have say are going to be the ones that stay. Okay, giftedness. Are people operating in an area of gifting, or are they literally a fish out of water? How about this? Philosophical agreement. They may agree that we're trying to move the gospel forward, but when it comes to, they don't agree with how you're going about climbing the hill. They want to go this way, and you're taking people this way. So they disagree philosophically. And the last one is an engaged leader. Yeah. So those are the big 10. So, I teach on this for hours and hours and hours.
You unpack each one of these. Let's just take a minute and talk about the one toward the beginning on sense of purpose, because I think it's or something worded like that. In other words, how do you really communicate? Let people see that I'm not just babysitting. I'm not just filling a slot. I'm doing something of significance. Talk about that one.
Yeah, I would say that we have the greatest opportunity. This one is the low-hanging fruit. And here's why. We have the scriptures. Yeah. And the scriptures are brimming with the idea that this is valuable, that giving your one and only life to the cause of Christ is good. So from a graphic standpoint, this one it's like a mountain with a flag on top. And the flag is the goal, the flag is the gospel. And, I think Ryan, I would say a sense of purpose. When I actually have a passion myself, others are going to be drawn to that. Listen, if I was standing on a street
Point.
corner talking about Q-tips, I'm going to probably gather a crowd if I'm passionate enough.
Yep.
But how much more so about the gospel? And so I, first of all, need to be passionate about the ministry and where I want to go. But I would say also the scriptures, like, you know, I have a list of 53 different scriptures, and you can cut them out, you can put them in your pocket, and you can walk around and literally speak a passage of scripture over somebody's life and just say, hey, listen, I prayed for God to lead me to a person today. You're my person. I'm going to read this and just bless you. So reminding people of the eternal value, reminding people, and God rewards. Like people are like, oh, should we reward kids? Of course, God does.
Sure.
I'm his kid. He has all kinds of rewards.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to remind people that you are laying up treasure in heaven that will never rot, rust, fade, anything. So this is, I need to be the, somebody says they're the CFO or the CEO. I'm the CRO, the chief reminding officer. I'm reminding people of the kingdom values. And of course, I'm going to throw in a little stat or two that a kid's moral foundation is set by 5. I'm going to throw in a stat that what somebody believes at the age of 13 is likely what they're going to believe the day that they die.
Yeah.
Those are good, but I want to tie it back to scripture. You know what I mean?
That's it. That's where the power is.
There is.
So let's talk about what's this look like if I've got, how do I do this if I've got 40, 50 volunteers? Well, and I'm already busy and I feel like I can barely keep my head above water. Talk to us about that.
Very good. Well, we did talk about this kind of triangle thing, right? And this 12, 3, 1 and all that.
Yes.
Everybody thinks in their mind, I've got to train everybody. And so they end up training nobody. And so what I've sought to do over the years, interestingly enough, is I train 12. And then I train the 3 at a really deeper level. But my requirement, if you're going to be one of my 3, you yourself have to have 12. And you yourself have to have 3. And I'll never forget this gal, Amy. She was a very, very, very good friend of mine. She gave me some pushback. And she was just, I could see in her face, she did. And I said, hey, listen, I love you. You're my friend. I am forcing you. You didn't come with your 3 last week. Give them to me this week.
Yeah.
And so she had to come up with, so in other words, it's a tiered approach. I am never going to be called to try to affect change at a deep personal relational level with 70 people. Ain't going to happen. However, I can do it really well with 3. And then I'm calling those 3 to mimic that which I just did in them.
So you're really training trainers, aren't you?
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Ryan, I had somebody say one time to me, wow, Josh, you must love kids. And I said, you know what? I actually do. But I got to let you know that the answer is that I actually train leaders who pour into leaders, who pour into leaders, who pour into kids. So I love kids and they know that and they love me and all that. But that's not my highest use is to pour into those 12 into those 3. That's what I do. That's all I do.
Yeah.
And it trickles down, right?
Josh, what's one thing that you wish, as you think about recruiting volunteers, caring for those volunteers, what's one thing that you wish you could go back and tell your 22-year-old young kids pastor, Josh, or you were probably teaching high school back then. When you started working in the church, what's one thing you wish you could go back and tell yourself? Like, hey, don't do this instead.
Okay. That's a very hard question. It's not hard because I can't come up with the answer. It's hard because I know the answer.
Yeah.
Ryan, painfully, there's drama and trauma that comes with church ministry. Let's just get real. Yep. If you are in a local church, there are hard things that happen. And you know what? Our church was going through a very, very, very challenging, well-managed church split. About 250 people exited, 250 families. but it was well managed. It was never, people just left, you know what I mean? And there was a lot of drama, a lot of hardship. Here's the moment of transparency. My wife was giving birth to our third child, and people who came to visit, I was shepherding them in the hallway, foolishly neglecting this one and only moment that my wife had just given birth to our third child. That was an unwise and very short-sighted decision. In other words, God, take care of that which I am incapable of taking care of, so I can take care of that which I'm supposed to take care of.
That is so good.
That's a painful story, Ryan. I know it's obviously rather personal, but that's a huge regret that I have. Now, was that a trajectory that I stayed on for the next decade? The answer is no. I changed course, but I would say that I would say, okay, God, Andy Stanley has a great book called Choosing to Cheat.
Good book.
Good book.
Yep.
And just a very, very provocative title, very short book, actually.
Yeah.
And he said, you can't do it all. I have to choose to cheat someplace or choose to fail someplace.
Yeah.
And so he said, at the end of 8 hours, I'm like, God, this is your church and I'm done. And like, you fill in the gaps here, as opposed to, God, I'm going to obsessively serve the church, fill in the gaps at my home.
Yeah.
Wrong answer.
That's true.
So
if somebody's going to get cheated, don't cheat your family, right?
That's right.
Because
I think that I need to remember that God cares far more about his church than I do. And I am a very limited capacity person, and he never sleeps, and I can depend on him.
You know, I think all leaders, whether you lead in a business context or in a church setting, I think all leaders struggle with work-family balance and not cheating. But I don't know, for some reason, I hate it that for pastors and ministry leaders, a lot of times it can be almost spiritualized. Like, I'm neglecting my family, but I'm doing God's work. And I don't believe at all that that's God's plan.
No, I don't believe it is. And I believe it's also a really, really, really twisted veneer. It's super thin, but it's spiritualizing abuse really to your family.
It really is.
Yeah,
it is.
And then also, here's the other thing that's hard, Ryan, is that you look around and the things, hey, listen, people go toward the applause. People move toward applause. And so when people are applauding you for this deeply self-sacrificial life that you're living for the church, you're going to move toward that. And other leaders are like, man, you're killing it. You're doing a great job. I want to be moving. I want to listen to the applause at home. You know what I mean?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. Josh, what would you say to someone who's listening to the podcast or watching this that's feeling lonely or discouraged right now? Maybe somebody who they've listened to us talk about building a team, recruiting volunteers, yet they just feel lonely. They feel discouraged. Would you give them a word of encouragement?
Yes. Well, first of all, what I want to do is have them sit down for this next one.
Okay.
And I want them to brace themselves. If you're feeling discouraged, if you're in a ministry context and you're feeling discouraged, you are experiencing a good case of the normals. Now, I kind of set it up that it was going to be this very dramatic thing, sit down. And I kind of set that up, but you're normal. You're not crazy. You're not a bad person. You didn't miss your calling. This is part of the cost of standing in this line at the job fair. That's first. You're experiencing normals. Next, I would say, God, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted. He is near to the brokenhearted. So another thing, he's near to the brokenhearted, but it also says in the book of James, draw near to the Lord and he will draw near to you. So how is it that you get the healing salve of Christ put on you? By going to your Heavenly Father. And so you are not going to escape the hardships of ministry. It's just that's the way that it is. It is a hard thing. There's job hazards. And so that's what I would say. Number one, you're normal.
Yeah.
Number two, go to the Lord. Number three, Ryan, this is my most important encouragement.
Yeah.
And I just recorded a podcast with a classically trained counselor, right? I think everybody ought to have an outside person outside of your church, outside of your denomination, possibly outside of your town,
Yeah.
that you can share the real stuff. In other words, Ryan, if my wife and I lead a house group for our church, and we led a house group back when I was a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody was a banker and they came to the small group and they said, "Oh my word, I'm sorry guys, can I just take a little time here? My boss is driving me crazy."
Mm-hmm.
And everybody listens to the story and they're like, "Man, that's lame. You're right. He shouldn't be doing that." And then it comes to me. I cannot, and I will not, and I should not say, "Oh my word, well, my boss is driving me crazy too."
Yeah.
This is a really hard time at my job. My job is their church. My boss is their senior pastor.
Yeah.
I don't get that opportunity afforded to me. Now, that doesn't mean that I should live in silence. That's the key. I need to find a place and a space that I can have authenticity and a genuine downloading of the hardships of my job.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to do that. But the pastorate can be one of the loneliest people jobs that there is.
Boy. Yeah. Oh, you're exactly right. Pastors are some of the most popular people I know, and lonely at the same time.
That's it.
Josh, before I wrap up with the final two questions, I like to ask everybody at the end of the podcast. You've talked about your lead volunteers course and membership. If somebody wants to learn more about this, will you give us some directions where to go?
You bet. So it's leadministry.com. And my goal is to help leaders all across the country to get organized, to lead with confidence, and to avoid burnout.
Yeah.
The way that I do that is through courses. I have a whole palette of top shelf courses. Right now, it's about $3,000 worth of courses, and they're all really, really, really high quality. And so they can join the membership, right? I'm full right now. There's a wait list for the one-on-one coaching, but really I achieve those goals of helping ministry leaders by the courses as well as one-on-one individual coaching. And so leadministry.com.
Very high caliber training. I encourage you all to go check that out. Josh, I always like to ask people on the podcast, number one, what's something God is teaching you right now or speaking to you about or showing you? And then what's something big that you're working on? No, you always are working on stuff. So Josh, is there something God's teaching you right now or showing you?
Yes, I'm glad that you asked that. This is very close to home. And we all have, if you have any kids, they have their ups and downs and all of that. And it's just been interesting for me to see the providence of God. And so, let's say that one of my kids has they have a challenging thing going on in their life, and there's a little bit of tears or a lot of tears, and there's a lot of, how do you deal with this? And the older we get, Ryan, the more I am not the sage on the stage as a parent giving the exact answer. I'm more of a guide on the side.
There you
go. I can't solve their problems. I'm giving them, hey man, the foundations of who we are as people and what our values are. How do we move forward, right? And so, and then, to see some tears, but then to see a couple days later for all of it providentially to get rectified, right? And so, and for it to be better than if I had manically tried to manage it, right? And so the last 2 weeks, I've just seen God providentially, that's the word providence means to provide. And so just the natural outflow of how life kind of happens, God is taking care of his people and he's listening to them. So that's
Praise
huge.
the Lord. I love it. And Josh, something that you're working on right now.
Oh my, which one should I pick?
I know, right?
Yeah. I would say that I just struck up a brand new partnership with a group called the Great Commission Collective, called the GCC.
Yeah.
And I didn't really plan for it, but I'm kind of moving into kind of softly into kind of it's 131 churches. I'm kind of softly moving into their exclusive training capacity.
That's
And
awesome.
so they're going to be, their entire denomination is going to be really wrapping around leadministry.com. We're going to have some
So
exclusive
smart.
monthly coaching as a denomination. There's a big thing in Canada. And they're a U.S. based organization. I'm not exactly why their thing is in Canada, but I'll be, I'm very excited about that. You're actually the first person to know.
That's
So
pretty neat. I love
yeah,
it. Well,
yeah,
they're smart for doing this. One of the best podcast listeners, one of the best investments you can make is in yourself.
yep.
And making sure that you are taking care of yourself. Nobody else going to do it if you don't. Invest in yourself, and then invest in your leaders. This is something that Josh is very, very, very passionate about. We love Josh here at Kids Matter. We are so grateful for him and his family and his ministry. He's a wonderful partner and friend. And Josh, I know you're very busy, so thank you for taking time to share on our podcast.
Absolutely. And I gotta do a quick shout out, Ryan.
Okay.
I am extremely grateful for the places and the spaces that you have built that allow other people to fulfill and live out their calling. So as an example, the Kidman MegaCon, that's a highlight of our year. We love that. And, we've partnered at a larger level for a lot of years.
Long time.
And we're there from the beginning.
Yep.
And it's one of my favorite things. I love to teach breakouts. I love to see the community. And so, let's get real, man. I sent you a text at the end of the last MegaCon. I said, I wouldn't have an opportunity to do what I'm doing had you not taken a risk in
so neat.
do the hard work of this conference.
God's so good. Thank you for sharing that word of encouragement. If you don't have your tickets to the Kids Matter conference next year, Josh is right. It was Kidman MegaCon Forever. We just changed.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
You're good. You can meet Josh in person. You can meet his team, learn more about his ministry, hear him speak. Kids Matter, thekidsmatterconference.com. Go check it out. Josh, thank you so much for your time.
You bet,
love
man. This
you.
was fun.
Yeah, it was.
Love
Thanks
you too,
so
Ryan.
much.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
This episode of the Ryan Frank Podcast has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more conversations to help you stay on the leading edge. And if you like what you've heard, please rate this podcast with 5 stars. Thanks so much, and we will talk to you next time.